What's going on, guys? So Kian, on the next day of the vlog, so day 2 in Berlin, and Landa's going to the zoo today, but I'm preferring to go to the museum, so kind of be a separate day for both of us. But it's really incredible how there's so many massive train stations in Berlin. So this is the Ostbahnhof, the West train station, and it really kind of looks like the main station in Dresden where I live, and that just shows the magnitude of this city compared to the rest of the cities in Germany, since it is the largest one. And there's many central stations, even though there's only technically one that has that name. Alright guys, so we're here at the East Side Gallery, which is the longest remaining stretch of the Berlin Wall. This is actually this is the beginning of it. Of course, there's certain sections that are cut off to allow people to move through, since it is the wall after all. But you can see it stretches all the way past the camera and way over there. It's like many blocks, I'm not sure, like 1 or 2 kilometers perhaps. And in fact, this side, it's all just graffiti. This is the western side of the wall. But in fact, on the other side, that's why it's called the East Side Gallery. It's because in 1990, as one of the measures of, well, actually this was after the Berlin Wall fell, and as a measure of kind of reconciliation, the East German government allowed artists to come and paint on each panel. And you'll notice that it's a much more kind of choreographed piece of art here on the east side, because literally artists were hired, I think 20 from like 20 something countries. And this is definitely the more beautiful side in my opinion, as opposed to the other side, which is just the western graffiti. So I'm gonna walk along this and check out the art and maybe highlight some of the pieces. So I'm still on the East Side Gallery, and here you have a display with many different handprints. The significance of this one in particular, as I read in a kind of a description, is that in the east side it was forbidden to touch the wall. You could not even come close to it. But when they started this painting and the artists essentially asked people to dip their hands in paint and put their mark on the wall, it kind of basically made it less of a serious offense to touch the wall. And it's quite incredible that art can have such an effect. Alright, so here you have the famous photograph of the 2 Soviet leaders kissing each other. Remember, my social studies teacher had this exact photo in his classroom on the wall, and I kind of forget what the significance is, but I'm certain that these are essentially 2 Soviet leaders, and yeah, it's a really well-known photograph, what may I say. So guys, that's it for the entire East Side Gallery. You can even see there's an interesting German flag overlaid or superimposed with a Star of David. And yeah, there's nothing after here. It's very interesting to note as well that the river, which you can perhaps see just behind me, the Spree River, was in fact owned by East Berlin, or rather it was in East Berlin. So not only was this wall preventing people from getting across to West Berlin, even if they got over that 3.6 meter wall, they still had to swim across the river and then cross and yet another fence. So it was essentially impossible to cross in this stage, and that's why many people were killed in their attempt to escape from the repressive government. So I'm in the Altes Museum, or the Old Museum, which highlights neoclassical art from the Hellenic Age, basically the Greek era. And here you have the statue of the Praying Boy, which if you look carefully is actually cut off of both arms. So when the statue was recovered, only the corpse was there without any of the arms, and it was added after the fact. Later on in 1747, when it was actually discovered in 300 BC, and it's for that reason called the Praying Boy, although it's not known if the hands were actually in that formation when it was originally created. Here behind me, you have a model of the Theater of Dionysus. I believe that's the correct pronunciation. Anyways, he was the Greek god of wine and something else. There was a festival every year that lasted for 5 days with 5 different performances each day in order to honor him. And this was the amphitheater where that would occur. And interestingly enough, there was only 3 actors during the entire play, and they had to often switch roles and play different genders in order to allow them to play different scenes. So once more, you can look at that. It's quite an immense theater, and it took 30 years to build, which is a testament to its size. So we're currently in the central atrium of the museum, which is a replica of classic Greek temples. There are 18 columns in total, which you can notice, and it seems to be an equally high amount of statues all across. So there's Zeus, Nike, Demeter, all of the Greek gods. And if you can notice up there on the second balcony, there's essentially replicas of the statues, or there's one statue for each one on the ground floor. I'm not sure if they're actually replicas. And then the ceiling is also incredibly impressive with the glass dome and many inscriptions along the top. Okay guys, so behind me you have a shield which is very fragmented, and I wanted to only highlight this because it really shows to what extent the curators or the historians who assemble these ancient artifacts have to put in excruciating work in order to get some depiction of what it was resembling in the past, because this is probably composed of tens of many tiny pieces that had to be painstakingly put back together. Here you have quite an amusing statue entitled Statue of Boy with Thorn, and as far as I can tell, it seems to be a shepherd boy taking a thorn out of the sole of his foot because he was walking, of course, without shoes, and it's slightly amusing. All right guys, so I'm done with the Altes Museum, and it's incredible. This is the balcony that I'm about to descend, but you have an incredible view of the Lustgarten, or the Pleasure Garden, from here, and that's once more the palace, which I passed by yesterday, of the Kaiser, so the Emperor of the German Empire. And yeah, you have a really nice view. You see these massive columns once more. This also was turned into kind of a point for very large rallies during the Third Reich, where Hitler or other high-ranking officers such as Goebbels, the director of propaganda, would stand here and talk to the entire crowd in the distance, which was all just straight cement. They had actually torn down all the trees and grass to make this essentially a place for fascism to propagate, and it's incredible. But the ceiling is also very, very good, and I'm gonna make my way to the next museum since I have the museum pass, and I gotta get to as many as I can. All right guys, so I'm now in the Neues Museum, or the new museum, but as it seems, even though it's called the new museum, there's much older kind of artifacts here as opposed to the old museum, because you have Egyptian, essentially, sarcophaguses here, if I'm not mistaken. And it's very interesting to see that there's even hieroglyphics in the inside of the coffin, and it's all throughout this kind of cellar, which is really hot, 25 degrees Celsius, which for a museum is pretty toasty since they're usually around room temperature, but I assume that's for the better preservation of all of the different items. So let's move on to the next exhibit. First of all, if you guys thought it was lying, you can see there 25 degrees Celsius, but more interestingly, you'll notice the footwear in this exhibit. So the one right there is kind of a child's footwear. It's very small and made out of some cloth. The one here is very cool, as you can notice the curved manner of the construction or the structure, which I'm not sure what it served for, but it must have been some mechanism to prevent maybe rocks from getting inside or something like that, but it kind of looks like a snowshoe. So check this out guys, this has nothing to do with the actual kind of items that are on display in the museum, but this is located in almost every room, this device, which both records the humidity, the relative humidity in the room, and the temperature. So you see there, it seems to be consistently around 25 degrees and the humidity around 50%, and each kind of column is a day, which I find incredibly interesting since they kind of probably gather statistics on the changes in humidity and temperature. If one room has a average that is below that accepted amount, they probably change the ventilation or something like that, which is yeah, interesting to know. So here in the center of the new museum, there's a big atrium. So in fact, all of the exhibitions kind of run along the atrium, and there's different entrances to the inside, but it's only on the ground floor where there's actually this big space. Since on the other floors, you only just have a view. And I wanted to highlight, it's very interesting that they essentially have all of the fragments of this big bust, or I'm not sure what the term is, and they, as you can see, kind of replaced it with just plaster to show what the continuation would have been. But since those pieces are not actually have ever been found, they only have the certain sections that are there. So yeah, it's like that for all of the big plaques here. So it's very interesting. Here you have very long sheets of scroll with a bunch of characters and hieroglyphs and even images. And in fact, they're called books according to the description or the label, and it makes sense because end to end, if you made that into a binded book, it would probably have quite a few pages. So I guess that's why they call these books. So check out this statue of a standing striding figure. However, it's quite unique since it's made of wood. And yeah, not too many structures or statues here that are created with wood, since I believe it has some restrictions on how the sculptor can create the statue, but it's still quite impressive work of art. And you can see the comparison with the stone or granite bust, which actually is in worse condition than the wooden version.